Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Looks like we got a really good turnout this afternoon. My name is Jerry Otero. I serve as the Legend Policy Director for the Grand Canyon Trust. I'm based out of Colorado. If you're tuning in, you're in the right place at the right time. This is the 2026 Policy Outlook for America the Beautiful for All. And we have a really great agenda. We've got a really great group of panelists here. Before we do that, I just want to do a couple things, a couple acknowledgments, a little bit of briefing on where we're at in terms of timing with panelists, and then we'll kick it off. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat or message us, and we could try to get those addressed as we roll through. So thank you all for being here. Okay, so just a little bit of background on the coalition. America the Beautiful for All has been around for close to 5 years now, believe it or not. We are the most geographically diverse and representative coalition to exist, when we say that proudly. We have representation all over the United States and across U.S. territories, and do our best to be representative and bring as much into our tent of people that want to work alongside us as possible. With that, I want to express thanks to the attendees for you all for joining us. A pitch here, if you're interested at the end of this to joining the coalition, reach out to us. We'd love to work with you. So think that through as we talk through some of the issues that we're going to discuss today. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about, I don't mean to make this a serious note here, but a couple of things that are important to note. Today, there is a national general strike going on, and it's in response to a whole slate of issues that are happening across the country centered on the tragedies in Minneapolis. And with that, I want to note a couple things. For some of us, oppression like this has been going on for centuries, and people have seen and felt this for a very long time. And so this moment in our history feels tragic, but not necessarily new. For others in this country, the tragedy that we're seeing play and unfold is very new and very palpable, and the bolts of democracy feel to be loosening. And so I just want to acknowledge that while we're talking about conservation, we're talking about policy and a forward look at 2026, we also want to recognize that we live in a time that is very complex, very difficult, also for many people scary. And so we want to acknowledge that. With that, I want to just take it up a notch here and brighten it up a little bit and introduce our panelists. We've got a really, really great group of people here to talk about what policies in 2026 and a little beyond will look like. And I want to introduce those folks here. With that, the first panelist that we're going to go to Addie. But Addie, here's the rules here for introducing yourself. Obviously, your name, your organization, but the get to know you question is a deep one. It's up here. It's a thinker, and it is, what is your favorite sandwich? So you will go first. So I'm going to plop that on you, and then from there we'll go to Basha.
Is a hot dog a sandwich? Thanks, Jerry. You've actually moderated a panel that I've been on before, and I'm shocked you invited me back. So thanks for having me, Jerry. I'm Addie Hoy. I'm a legislative director for Lands, Wildlife, and Oceans at Earth Justice. I have been with the coalition since the beginning. I'm on the wildlife work group and help out on the steering committee. Earth Justice's president, Abby Dillon, sits on the steering committee for the coalition, and we're honored to sit in that role and support this work. My favorite sandwich, I love a sandwich. I mean, a Cuban. It has to be a Cuban, I think. I'm going with it. Thanks, Jerry.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Basha Marks with the Ocean Defense Initiative. I'm a member of the Ocean Sub Working Group in the America the Beautiful for All Coalition. And let me see, my favorite sandwich, probably like a turkey avocado club situation with a little bit of sprouts on it and a sourdough bread. And I'm happy to pass it over to Jewel.
So I'm Jewel Tomasula. I'm a wildlife work group co-lead for America the Beautiful for All Coalition and national policy director for the Endangered Species Coalition. And I love a sandwich with smoked salmon, or lux, as some people call it. I'm not from a region where that is common, but I have come to love it. And I am passing to Kate.
Good morrow, everyone. I'm Kate Burgess, she, hers. I am the Conservation Program Manager with the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, former Priorities Projects and Campaigns co-lead with Jerry, the longest title ever. We need more acronyms. Favorite sandwich is an Oreo, and I Googled it, and that is technically a sandwich, so I'm sticking with it. And Martine, I'll pass it to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate, and good to see everybody here. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Castro. I serve as the Watershed Science Director at the Rio Grande International Studies Center. We're a frontline organization based in Laredo, Texas, and I am also the freshwater co-lead for the America the Beautiful Coalition. I've been with the coalition since 2023, late 2023 involved. So yeah, happy to be here. I'm a fan of just a classic Italian sandwich. Also not from a region where this is a common sandwich, but I love classic Italian sandwiches. Like just the saltiness of the salami and other cold cuts is like my favorite. I forget who hasn't gone. Is that it, Jerry?
I think that's it, Martine.
Awesome.
So with that, I mean, we opened up with the hard-hitting questions, and from here it's just going to be a nice, easy ride with all the other stuff we're dealing with. But that said, just to give you all a take of what we're going to do here, we have the panelists that are going to talk about policy issues, big picture, state level, federal, all that good stuff. We're going to have time for questions and engagement with panelists and members of the coalition, so we'll have that as well. And then we'll do some wrap up with some resources and opportunities that we have ahead of us as a coalition, and certainly would welcome you into working with us in the future. So with that, I want to really talk a little bit about the big picture here and set a tone and kind of a context for the world that we're all operating in. As you all know, the world's crazy right now, but within crazy, we still got to work. We all still got to go to work, and we got to dig in and get things done. So with that, I want to just ask this question here to the team and get some good responses from you all. And the question is this: when you look ahead at 2026, what's one trend or dynamic in the political landscape that most concerns you? And what gives you the most hope for saving nature, upholding justice, and defending public health?
Jerry, I can jump in.
Can I go to you? Yep.
You sure can. Okay, I'm going to choose hope first for 500, Alex. And I'm going to start with a quote from my hero, Jane Goodall. Hope is her thing. So she says, when we focus on the future, we do one of three things. We fantasize, which involves big dreams that are mostly for fun and entertainment. We dwell, which involves focusing on all the bad stuff that might happen. Or we hope, which involves envisioning the future while recognizing the inevitability of challenges. So in that spirit, we're going to hope today. And I'm going to give you a few examples on how states are hoping too. First, I want to start with a wee bit of context. 2026 is an even year, which means it's a short legislative session for most states, which means that bills are introduced, heard, voted on, and either die or pass before you can say Carolyn and Rick Burgess, which are my parents, and they're here. What's up, guys? To put it in perspective, New Mexico, for example, their session is only 30 days, and several states like Montana, Nevada, North Dakota, and Texas don't even convene. Even year state legislative sessions often focus on passing supplemental budgets, technical amendments, and more kind of focus on expedient lawmaking. It's also a big election year for states and territories as well. So you're probably thinking, what does all of that have to do with state conservation policies and giving us hope? Well, it means that there is a narrower window for things to go through. And so that any trends we're seeing pop up on conservation issues means that they're worth paying attention to because they're poking through all of the noise and their priorities for lawmakers. So to kind of put that in context, I'm going to share two specific examples. One that's giving me hope is around seeing states that are strengthening state versions of federal laws that are being rolled back. One example is around endangered species acts. 47 states and Puerto Rico have their own state or territorial endangered species act. And with the 5 proposed rules that we saw in 2025 that have been aiming to dramatically strip the federal Endangered Species Act of their legal integrity, states are really stepping up to fill in the gaps. In 2025, at least 19 states introduced 38 bills to address local wildlife conservation needs through strengthening their state ESAs. And in 2026, we've already seen 9 bills across 5 states. Maryland is an early leader, kind of a North Star of sorts. The lead sponsor of a bill that just passed or it just got introduced is coordinating with her peers across other states to try and create this regional matrix of protection on endangered species. Her bill basically says, yeah, so everything that's being rolled back at the federal level, we're going to keep that in our state statute, and we're actually going to make it even a little bit tighter. So it's a really important backstop as we're seeing federal bedrock environmental laws get rolled back. One more piece of hope that I will share that's also tied to a concern is around data centers. It's not my area of expertise, but we do know already that they are negatively impacting communities through reducing air quality, access to clean water, use of fossil fuels, high cost burden on ratepayers. And they're often cited in communities that are already disproportionately exposed to environmental harms. There's a lot of bipartisan state movement around this. And we've already seen 13 bills in 2026 that address things like transparency, ratepayer protection, studying water impacts and requirements for data centers to use clean energy. So those are 2 kind of North Stars in this conversation that I wanted to point to on the basis of hope. And with that, I will pass it to my colleague, Basha, to tell us a little bit more about what she's seeing.
Thank you, Kate. I love that you started with hope because unfortunately, a lot of my concern in this next year kind of comes down to the speed with which the administration and Congress has been able to roll back or undermine protections for our environment and the ways that they're cutting public out of their normal public processes, right? So skirting things like public comments, proposing bills that would eliminate judicial review, which is a really important check for communities on federally supported infrastructure that could pose harm to people. So the speed with which they're able to do that is really concerning to me. I don't think we saw this in the first Trump administration. They're clearly a lot more organized and sophisticated about how quickly they're going through these things. One thing that does give me hope is that I feel like one of the biggest checks I've seen on this administration is honestly public opinion and bad press. When you start seeing overwhelming public opinion and negative press about what the administration is doing, what Congress is doing, you oftentimes see them really quietly kind of revert back or undo things. They're not announcing it. They're not proud of rolling these things back, but there's this whole taco sentiment for a reason. We've seen this in the public lands fights when hunters and anglers joined with conservationists, and we saw provisions stripped out of major legislation this past year. And I think right now we're starting to see what's going to happen with things like deep sea mining and offshore drilling, where public comment and public sentiment has helped remove areas like the Atlantic coast from proposed new offshore drilling plans. And I think this coalition is really valuable for that because it's helping drum up diverse voices from across the country that are able to engage in public comment periods and press and help demonstrate that there's broad opposition to some of these proposals, including deep sea mining, which I believe this coalition played an important role in getting over 60,000 comments opposed to deep sea mining in the Pacific. So that's what gives me hope, is coalitions like this, an opportunity to build power and push back.
Thank you, Basha. Let's talk a little bit about change, right? We talked about concerns. We talked about hope here. Many of us that are in this room now worked during the first Trump administration, during the last Biden administration. I will say this, and I feel old. I worked in 5 presidential administrations, which is crazy. And I will say I have not seen the things that I've seen over the past 8 years that I've seen today. And so that's a real important thing to note, in that the Trump administration is governing decisively. We're seeing what they're doing. And what I would love to hear from the panelists is, what do you feel like has changed over the past year in the movement, where we need to understand where we're heading into 2026? Jewel, I'll go to you.
In one word, it's Congress, and needing to focus on Congress, kind of echoing what Basha said. The administration is move fast and break things, and they're shortening public comment, and we don't have the administrative allies that even in the first Trump administration folks were able to find, with the way the federal workforce has been gutted and folks have been replaced. So the administration is just not an ally. So it does come to Congress to find unlikely allies who could go behind the scenes, and that's how some programs have been saved or things have been remedied and decisions have been heard with some congressional allies on unlikely allies, strange allies, and also working with champions, folks who have been on our side to help get that press and drum up that public opposition and change that public narrative, with congressional champions who join and adding their comms team strength and adding their megaphone to shift things. So in the movement, we're also seeing a new awareness of just like when we work with grassroots and people on the ground, people more willing to call Congress and make those daily calls. And that's exciting in a way, because I think, my experience is kind of like begging people to call Congress, and they're like, oh, okay. But now there's a really it's changed over the past year, people understanding and awareness and willing to put on that pressure.
The power of people. Basha, I want to go to you as well.
Yeah, I'll riff a little bit off what Jewel was mentioning. I think one thing that's changed that I haven't really noticed in my lifetime is just like how comfortable or familiar people are with the notion of reaching out to Congress, right? You have like an app that's dedicated to helping facilitate, connect you to your legislators or advocate for an issue. So the barriers of entry are lower than they have been, which I think is really important to consider as we try to influence legislators and give them the evidence to push back on the administration through back channels if you have someone that the administration listens to in office. Another thing, it often seems like the administration is going to do what they're going to do, right? And steamroll the public or steamroll whoever is against them. But continuing to engage in things like public comment periods and opportunities to make your voice heard is really important. You're demonstrating public support or opposition, you're building power, you're learning how like the legislative or the federal process works. And it gives support to organizations that might litigate. It gives support to members of Congress who are uncomfortable pushing back by having tangible numbers and complaints from their constituents that they can go to the administration to appeal decisions with. And so just want to really underscore the importance of engaging in these public processes, whether it's contacting your legislators, engaging in public comment periods, that continues to be something really important. And I've been really encouraged in this last year by seeing how many people are down to speak up and call their reps.
Those are really great points, and it reminds me of the duality of Congress and citizen engagement, in that we're the answer. The people are the ones that elect people to go do the work, but we can't give them excuses not to do the work by not picking up the phone, not writing the emails. Ultimately they have to go into committees and make votes. And at the same time, we also aren't just there to complain or oppose, but to build champions, because there are a lot of really great legislators out there that are doing fantastic work in a time of crisis like that we're in right now. It's nice to see leaders emerge, new people, new faces step up to the plate and really lead in places where we desperately need it. And so thanks for sharing that commentary there. Any other thoughts on what we need to do, or like what you feel like has changed the most? Any of the other panelists want to jump in here? If not, we can go to the next question. Okay, so we're going to talk a little about the good things, the bad things, and the ugly things. By the way, if you've seen that movie, it's a fantastic movie. My dad made me watch it when I was a kid. Clint Eastwood, Eli Wallach, a really classic spaghetti Western. But if you get the chance, check it out. Okay, so the question is, what are the biggest policy threats or rollbacks we should be preparing for in 2026, and who's driving them? This question will be for all the panelists, so each of you jump in if you can, or when you can.
I'm happy to jump in first. As I've touched on, I think offshore drilling and like deep sea mining, ocean exploitation broadly are themes that we'll see come up this year. Fortunately or unfortunately, there's public comment periods involved for proposals for the administration to expand deep sea mining, lease our public waters, same thing for offshore drilling. We just ended a national public comment period for offshore drilling, but there's 2 public comment periods open for Southern and Central California right now, and there will be more throughout the year. So those are great opportunities to tap in. And this coalition is a great area to learn when those come up and how to engage.
When you say deep sea mining, what is like the play now? Is it rare earths? Is it oil and gas? Is it all of the above?
Yeah, so deep sea mining is often like hard minerals. So like manganese nodules, rare earth elements, things that are like critical minerals to the United States versus offshore drilling would be like oil and gas.
Got it. Thank you so much. Other panelists, hop in here.
I'll go. A big policy threat that we're looking at in 2026, it's around the Endangered Species Act. So last year we saw administrative proposals and they were not finalized in 2025, just they're proposed and those public comment periods open. So we'll be seeing that, or we'll be in this waiting period if they're under review this year, and maybe we'll be seeing them finalized and administratively the federal national level Endangered Species Act being weakened that way. And then we also have in Congress, in the House side, the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee is very doggedly pushing this overhaul, overhaul to the Endangered Species Act. It's called the ESA Amendments Act, and it is endorsed by the American Petroleum Institute and mining industry, logging industry. So it kind of gives you a sense of who's really behind this and who it is serving. But in this, all this mix of conversation around having to build fast and permitting reform, it's being pushed into that mix. And so that's a big policy threat that, of course, the Endangered Species Act is stopping extinction bill. And so it's a really serious to think about how even with all their profits, they want nothing in their way, even if it means putting a species off of this planet forever.
I mean, that's as serious as it gets right there. Others?
Yeah, Jerry, I can jump in here with some public lands updates on some of the threats that we're dealing with in that space. And there's quite a few, but maybe I'll just highlight some of the ones that we're dealing with right in this early part of the year. Folks might have heard about some of the Congressional Review Act resolutions that we're facing in Congress. So I want to share a little bit about what the Congressional Review Act is, which is a statute that was passed back in the 90s that gives Congress the power through some what are supposed to be really specific procedures and specific circumstances to undo agency actions and things that agencies might do. But we've really seen in this administration in particular, in this Congress in particular, a ramp up of sort of abuse of this Congressional Review Act power in Congress to try to undo in really sort of questionable ways that it's never been used before, ways that certainly, at Earth Justice as lawyers that we're, concerned about to undo important regulatory and legal protections. So we saw this, and it's not just in the public lands context, it's in the public health context. We saw this around the Clean Air Act. So a couple of specific ones, we saw some last year around resource management plans for public lands, for Bureau of Land Management lands. This year, it's really ramping up. I think those were successful. They passed Congress, they were signed by the president, and that kind of emboldened this effort. And we're really seeing some very scary expansion of the use of this power, ramping up of the use of this power by Congress right now that I think really deserves our attention. One that I would highlight is an attack on the boundary waters in Minnesota. That's a wilderness area. It's one of the most visited wilderness areas in the country, some of the cleanest water that we have. And it's really driven by a single mining company, Antofagasta. It's a Chilean mining conglomerate that really wants to build a mine there. And they've had this massive lobbying push to try and put themselves in a position to be able to mine in the watershed of the boundary waters. And part of that requires reversing a decision from 2023 to withdraw mineral leasing rights from the area, a decision that was made during the Biden administration to protect that water, to say that we shouldn't lease these minerals because mining here would be too dangerous for the water here. And so, this is something that we're looking at, both legally, but also that I think folks really need to speak up and bring attention to, this sort of importance of places like the boundary waters and need to protect them from these blunt instruments. And we're also starting to hear a real risk that our national monuments could be attacked using the Congressional Review Act. And I would encourage, I know there's a lot of folks on this call who have worked on monuments, whether they're large landscape conservation monuments, whether they're cultural or historic monuments. I think if you're someone who cares about monuments, being aware of the CRA is really important right now. The first one that we're aware of is some of the congressional Republicans in Utah looking at possibly using the CRA to attack the management plan for the Grand Staircase Escalante monument. And that is a real concern and something that I think we also need to be paying attention to. So just a note on monuments, also very precedent setting and concerning there. Another legislative piece that I would mention is something that this coalition has been really active on and incredibly helpful with in the last year. There's a bill moving through the Senate right now which is sort of misnomer, called the Fix Our Forests Act, which contains some really concerning poison pills that would undermine our national forests, that would allow for 10,000 acre projects or clear cuts, basically, that could be without any environmental reviews, without any public notice, without taking a look at what the environmental impacts of those would be. It would undermine the public's access to engage in those projects, to challenge those projects, to question them, and also would undermine the implementation of the Endangered Species Act on our national forests. And so, it's a big bill. There's a lot of things in it, but these really nasty poison pill items that are really damaging for conservation and really damaging for our national forests are still in the bill. And there's been some real success in bringing attention to these. When the bill moved through the Senate committee, there were unanimous, Democrats were unanimous in opposing these poison pills and speaking out against them and trying to remove them through the amendment process. Unfortunately, with Democrats in the minority, it wasn't possible. But that strong show of force, I think, was still there. So I think that's another one where if you haven't called your senator yet on the Fix Our Forests Act, now is the time, because I think it could move forward at any time, and there are a lot of concerns there to be raised to protect our forests. And Jerry, maybe the last one that I'll mention as a policy area of concern that I think folks ought to be paying attention to is actually something Jewel mentioned, but maybe I'll mention it at a higher level, which is something we're hearing a lot about, which is permitting reform. And what I would really encourage folks on this call is to you might hear about permitting reform, and if you're working in the sort of conservation space, in the biodiversity space, in the community engagement space, or some of these other areas, like, you might not necessarily think that applies to you, but it really does. There are folks who are using this phrase permitting reform as a big umbrella term to sort of scoop in a lot of different possible changes and reforms to the law that could impact all of us. They could be changes to the National Environmental Policy Act, which is how we get a lot of our sort of environmental reviews and comments on environmental issues. Endangered Species Act, which Jewel mentioned, but also a lot of attacks on the Clean Water Act, sort of in the name of permitting reform. And, there's a bit of a nefarious effort, I think, to kind of jumble and confuse the issue, where there may be some smart reforms to be had that could make things smarter or faster or whatever. But if those are coupled with, reductions in our protections for our clean water, protections for communities, and in communities having a say in the impacts of projects, of things that happen that impact them, that could cause harm, that's obviously not a trade-off that's worth making. And so I think really sort of, if you hear something that's permitting reform, that's called permitting reform, it's worth really picking apart. What are they talking about? Like, what is the actual reform that they're talking about? And is it possible that it could impact my community and the things that I, that I'm working to protect? So just something to think about, I think, as we move into this year when this is going to be a hot topic.
Thanks.
Is that helpful, Jerry? Okay,
yeah.
Good. Yeah.
There's so much going on in public lands. And Addie, you hit on some really great points. I would just say, as a little personal commentary here, at every level, public lands are under attack. When you think about how the administration is viewing energy development, leasing, how they view reclamation, just the structure and the infrastructure connected to them in the federal agencies, staffing, funding, all of those things are threatened right now. But that said, I think what I would pitch to this team of 100 or so people assembled is that there's a scale component here. Each one of us is looking at our field office that we may work in or close to in the West, or a national issue where we can help as a coalition in saying, hey, let's take those regional issues and find all of the different community members and leaders that can work together. We have that reach. Secondly, when we elevate it up to a national scale, how can we work together to take those regional issues that certainly have a national tether and make them relevant to the decision makers to change and to move the needle where we need it moved? And so that's something I think there's a real strength in this coalition. Addie obviously has a ton of expertise, among with many others, on that. And so that's something I would pitch hand in hand to the team here, is if you all are interested, these are the places where we feel very confident we can make change when we have those coalitions that are scaled from the regional level all the way up to the national one. One other last thing I would mention here on public lands that I think is really important and relevant, and that is the history of public lands and the interpretation of public lands. We look at how we view our access to those places, our history, our place, how we recreate, how we visit them with our families, friends, and others. And that's a place I think we should take very serious, a place of work that we should take very seriously, not just because some people say it's DEI or woke, but because it is our history, and the history of our country should be told unvarnished. And so that's something I know this coalition has engaged in, and certainly many, many others, but I just want to acknowledge that in a time where it seems like history is getting rewritten in front of our eyes so many days of the week. And so just wanted to note that. With that, I want to move to the federal versus state dynamics here, and I want to talk a little bit about which states are likely the bellwethers in the country for America the Beautiful for All and its priorities, either as leaders or a cautionary tale. I think, Kate, you would be the best person to go with that, right?
Heck yeah, Jerry. I appreciate you talking about like the different layers of power and government. I often feel like that Bernie Sanders meme of like, I'd love to get asking you to get excited about state policy, but like it really does matter. States are a backstop and a last line of defense in many different ways. And it can be very overwhelming to stay apprised of federal movement, even though the lovely people on this call are the ones that are so plugged in and helping us break down how to understand what's happening. But I personally will continue to beat the drum of progress happening in your own backyard, and kind of this narrative of states as labs of innovation that can scale ideas to other states and nationally, especially during an election year where 60% of state Senate seats are up and 90% of lower house seats are up. And don't forget that they represent you. So a few states that I want to talk about as bellwethers that I think as leaders so far in the state legislative sessions have four. First is Hawaii, and aloha nui loa to Kevin on the call from over in Hawaii. Hawaii is doing a couple of really cool things. One, they're introducing bills to adopt really successful international models as the US withdraws from globally renowned treaties and conventions like the Paris Agreement, UNFCCC, IUCN. They recently just introduced a bill to adopt a really successful eco-sanctuary model from Aotearoa, New Zealand, as a means of bringing back Hawaiian biodiversity and improving ecological health, which is a really cool kind of lesson sharing, as we can't really rely on the federal government to stay apprised of global progress. And they are also making waves to try and maintain previous administration kind of era regulations. And so they just introduced a bill that would authorize the Hawaii Board of Land and Natural Resources to adopt rules to implement any federal regulation related to lands, minerals, water, and coastal areas that existed on or before January 1st, 2025. I think we all remember what was happening before January 1st, 2025. Which ultimately would provide them a lot more flexibility to respond to upcoming federal changes. So I think Hawaii is a really interesting case of innovation. Vermont is another one. They're a part-time legislature, but they're doing a lot. And they're taking on SACIT and the recent EPA proposed rule in a really, I think, inspiring way. So they just introduced a bill that would basically try to align with the current snapshot of federal Clean Water Act protections before they are potentially watered down, pun intended, if that proposed rule takes flight. What's novel about this bill? I'll just mute that person. Novel about this bill is that there's 3 new types of ways that Vermont can protect wetlands and waterways that would otherwise be excluded from federal Clean Water Act protections. And so it's a really cool model for other states that are feeling the pressure of Clean Water Act rollbacks and want to have kind of a backstop at the state level. 2 more. Virginia is tackling the data center issue in a really big way, as they are home to the majority of data centers in the United States. And they also have a lot of bipartisan bills that are coming around to protect endangered species and cull invasive species. And lastly, Puerto Rico, is a really cool example. They had this coral reef as critical infrastructure bill that passed a few years ago. And legislators in Puerto Rico met with legislators in Florida, and Florida just introduced a very similar bill. And that bill, while it seems like it may be a small designation, actually opens up a lot more opportunity to access federal funds that are still earmarked that they otherwise wouldn't have been eligible for. So it's really fun to see, maybe fun is like a weird word to say in this conversation, but I think it's fun to see the types of kind of cool and innovative opportunities that states are piloting that you can bring to your own legislators in your own state. And I will close by saying that the last piece is we're already seeing trends of states introducing bills to establish formal legislative bodies to improve state and tribal relations. And so South Dakota just introduced a bill to establish a tribal consultation commission. New York introduced one to establish an Office of Native American Affairs. Washington with a legislative office on Indian affairs. And there cannot be any conservation without government-to-government relationships with the tribes, and states have a massive responsibility to uphold treaty protections and do their due diligence in terms of working with tribal nations in implementing environmental protection. So cool to see that. And it's my state report. Back to you, Jerry, for the news.
Other panelists want to jump in here?
I'm happy to hop in. I think thank you for the state overview. It's nice to see local leadership there, Kate, but also at a federal level, obviously this is an election year where a third of our Senate and all of our members of the House of Representatives will be up for election. So seeing how folks are responding and what they're campaigning on, I think is going to be a bellwether. One state where I think natural resources and conservation issues are particularly central to the election is Alaska, with former Congressman Peltola running against Dan Sullivan. Alaska obviously has really unique natural resources management and issues, but you're seeing where fisheries are pinned up against mining, drilling, public access, and opportunity for subsistence hunting and fishing coming front and center. So that's an area where a lot of the issues we as a coalition work on intersect with people's day-to-day lives in the state. So I think seeing how that election pans out, what public sentiment is in the state leading up to the election, will be kind of a bellwether for what happens. We recently saw Alaska State House flip from Republican to Democrat control, which was pretty shocking to some people. So we'll see what happens in this upcoming Senate race. But I think that's another state to keep a tab on.
Really, really interesting stuff. Thanks for that, you two. We have about 15 minutes left. We're 3/4 of the way through. We got a couple more questions here for the panelists, and then we're going to open it up for some questions here. So just keep that in mind as we move through. We want to make sure we have time for some discussion and then some wrap up and final thoughts. If you wanted to change your view on which sandwich you like, Kate, I'm looking at you on the Oreo there, but we can talk about that later. So let's talk about engagement and movement strategy. How do we accomplish? How do we make things happen? How do we actually do something in a very difficult time? And the question for the panelists is this. What's one moment or decision point this year where broad cross-network mobilization could shift the outcome? The short of it is, what can we do? How do we do it? I'll open it up to the full team here to discuss that.
Yeah, I can maybe give an example here. Basha mentioned earlier the deep seabed mining comment period that a bunch of folks in this coalition helped with, and I just want to offer up a link, between the work that was done on that comment period to activate folks and some of the outcomes that have really, I think, we're starting to see come out of that effort. There were tens of thousands of comments over a couple of comment periods that have occurred at the sort of the last half of last year. And we saw just in recent weeks, a real sort of activation of elected officials, both at the territory level in the Pacific, as well as in Congress, including Republican officials who are showing up for hearings and speaking on this issue, who are coming to DC to lobby on the issue. And I think these activations, this sort of engagement that we're seeing are really having an impact. And so I think it's like the things that are happening at the local level really sort of breaking through and having an impact. I live and work in DC. I'm engaged a lot of times when there are the hearings and things like that. And we don't always see, we don't always see in the hearings here in DC as much as we would like the voices from the communities that are actually impacted break through. But when we have the actual, basically make as big of a splash as we did on those deep seabed mining comment periods, it really does break through. We really saw that. We had, 3 Republican members of Congress come to a hearing and speak out against deep seabed mining, really as a result of all the public outcry that we were a big part of as a coalition. So I think that's an example of some movement strategy and how it interplays at different levels, local up to the federal.
That's a really great point on getting members in the community in front of Congress. I mean, there's such an important role there, and sometimes we see a lot of the same voices there. So great point, Eddie. Others. Let's also keep in mind we're at 47 after, so try to keep our responses to a minute or two, and then we can go from there.
Perfect. I can go next, Jerry. Thank you, and thank you, Eddie, for those remarks. Yeah. So one of the I think most urgent policy flashpoints this year that really sort of I think demands this cross-network mobilization that Jerry mentioned earlier is, as Kate mentioned earlier, the proposed joint rule by EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, or DoD, to even further narrow the federal protections under the Clean Water Act in response to the second decision. Because this proposal, I think, frankly, it's a politically expended workaround to the Supreme Court's ruling, again, abandoning protections for wetlands and ephemeral streams that really don't meet a very narrow, legally fraught, sort of contentious surface connection test. I know that's a mouthful, because if we don't push back, I think it's going to have really devastating, impact on these already overburdened and climate vulnerable communities, especially those in arid and semi-arid regions like the southwestern U.S., the borderlands where I live and work, and oftentimes these ephemeral waterways that the rule is trying to roll back. These are the only fresh surface water systems that we have if we're not talking about groundwater. because as we know, according to the EPA and U.S. Geological Survey, ephemeral streams account for the majority of stream mileage in arid areas. This is critical for everything from groundwater recharge, migratory wildlife corridors, flood control, and of course freshwater connectivity during seasonal flows. And just earlier this week, there was a group of senators that issued a very strong letter, about 15 senators, I think, to EPA and Administrator Zeldin and the DoD, calling this rollback unacceptable, of course, because they're citing clear risks, right, to everything from public health and, of course, these other environmental justice communities. But though the public comment period is already over, I think it terminated earlier this month at the beginning of January. If there is anything I think I've learned from combating federal overreach, especially from a frontline perspective, is that really nothing is ever like a done deal. So although the rollback, proposes, poses a serious threat to, these water protections. We do need to keep pushing back, keep applying the pressure on EPA and Army Corps, calling our congressional allies to step in. I think getting 15 senators to submit a letter to the administration was quite a powerful stance. So yeah, that's just my brief remarks. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Martin. Let's go one more quick response on that, and then we're going to shift to some resources and tools. And one more panelist jump in there for 1 minute, if you could.
I can jump in real quick to nail home the state stuff. Not a decision point necessarily, where I think broad or cross-network mobilization could shift the outcome, but just kind of a general invitation. Number one, if you don't know who your state legislators are, go do that. Number two, if you don't know what committees your legislators are on, go figure that out. Just because they're not on an environmental committee doesn't mean they can't have some sort of value or buy into an environmental issue. We've been seeing increasingly legislators on judicial committees, insurance, health, human resources, education, can find an angle in environmental issues. And so if you're able to call your legislators to co-sponsor or vote on environmental bills, even if they don't typically seem like the typical kind of environmentalist, it's important that they know you're interested, because they need to know what they should be running on this year and what their communities want from them. In that line, I'll close by saying that this is very much a hands-on deck effort. My lifelong goal is to make state policy cool. And so because we need everyone to be educated, I bribed a bunch of my friends and family to come to this webinar who don't work in the policy space, because it's important for them to plug in. And my end of the agreement was to do a short Kermit the Frog impression during my remarks to get them to come and listen. So I will close by saying, it might not be easy being green, but it is easier when we can all be green together. And that's my way of getting people engaged in state politics. And back to you, Jerry.
If you would have told me at the beginning of this meeting that we were going to have a Kermit the Frog impression on a policy discussion, I would have not believed that in a million years. But hey, it fit well. It works. Great. Let's go. Let's go to the last question here. And please be quick, because we want to open up for discussion if there are questions. Just please rapid fire here. Talk about a tool, a resource, or a source of information that you can recommend to this group here that would be a useful resource and tool. Let's go. Let's start with Kate. We'll go back to you since you had that spot-on impression.
Sorry, it was still in Kermit mode. One resource or tool. I will shamelessly plug. We, NCEL, we're having a state session kickoff conversation in a couple of weeks. If you just can't get enough of what states are doing, come join us, and we'll have a little bit more information about what's happening at the state level, how you can plug in, and what trends are really popping off this session.
All right, Jewel, Basha, Addie. Anyone with a specific tool or resource in the last 7 minutes, and then we'll go to Q&A and then some closing remarks.
I can jump in and make a shameless plug for this coalition, since the organization I work with focuses largely on like federal and DC specifics. Having access to a coalition and its network of organizations like ATB is awesome. So if you want to learn more or just stay up to date on what actionable things are going on, they have amazing like email listservs, so you can get updates on a regular basis, or look into what organizations are part of the coalition and see if there's one that fits your interests or is geographically close to you, so you can keep in contact with them and get engaged.
Thanks. Let's go one more and then we'll go questions. Others? We good? Okay, so let's move quickly. I'm going to turn it over to Margaret. We may have time for one or two questions and then we'll go to closing remarks.
Hi, thanks, Jerry. Okay, a question from Kevin Chang. Beyond coalitioning and giving the barrage of threats to break things and move fast, what kinds of tools, processes, and activities are your organizations doing to prioritize or respond to it all? Anything working, or is it just adding anxiety? So again, ending on another easy one. What do folks think?
I mean, I would just add, I'm not a panelist here, but I would say there is a palpable frustration in the country because there are little levers to pull in Congress right now. And it's not Republican or Democrats. These are issues and policy based. And I just will be frank, it's a very narrow pathway in terms of the levers that you can pull in Congress based on the numbers right now. But that said, it doesn't mean in a time of crisis that we don't dig in and we don't fight. And I think that's where our strength is as a coalition. And I know Kevin, I believe, is part of the coalition. So Kevin, we've had a chance to talk a few times. And so it's something that as a coalition is a strength. I mean, if we don't lock arms, all of us in this room and many others, I mean, I think we're all in a much more dire situation than we would be if we were all trying to go at it alone. So that's just my personal take, but certainly would love to open it up to others here in the last 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll note that part of the beauty of coalitioning is finding that network of folks to trust, and other folks lead on ocean issues, for example. Like, I know I can trust what I see that Basha sends around, or Angelo and the coalition sends around, and I have that level of trust that I know they know what they're talking about. So when I review that and put, my name on it, or Endangered Species Coalition is behind it, that helps there. And I think it goes the other way, that I can keep focused on the Endangered Species Act and have these relationships. So when I pinpoint that this is the time to speak up on it, I know these folks will come and be behind it too. So that way it's not like I'm taking everything on that affects our wildlife or endangered species. I know that other folks have that expertise, and I think that's, folks taking their point on issues is really helpful.
I would also add a plug here for some of the really great communications tactics that I've seen. I think it's been mentioned a few times today that some of the moments when there's been real breakthrough in the media on issues like the public land sales, earlier in the year, last year, the threat of the public land sales, have been sort of watershed moments, like when there has been sort of change in policy by the administration. And I think so I do think it's worth it to write a letter to the editor. It's worth it to think about the communications tactics that you or your organization or your community are using, and the messaging that you're using. Our coalition has done a bunch of messaging trainings. We've done some messaging research, and we're continuing to build. That's one of our big goals as a coalition in 2026, is to build on our storytelling, and build on our messaging, because we're just, one of the things we learned in 2025 is that that's a place where we can find success. So we're trying to build on that learning, build on some of the research that we've done, and really work on that in 2026. So Kevin, I know you'll be a part of that, and just invite everybody to join us in that work.
Thanks, Daddy. I want to land this thing here right at the top of the hour. So I'm going to make a couple pitches here. One, I just want to thank Margaret, Olivia, Shanta, the executive director of the coalition, and most importantly, Kitty Craig of the Wilderness Society, for putting this all together. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Just a couple things here. The coalition is going to send you all an email with links and resources and the recording next week, so please watch for that. Provide any feedback. We'd like to continue in having these discussions. It's important for us to have these throughout the year and beyond, so that's a really important thing that we're working on. And then lastly, we're trying to grow here. We've got a really great coalition that continues to build and build and build since I've been here, exponentially every quarter. But we need all the help we can get. It doesn't harm anyone to be in the coalition, to listen in, to contribute, to drive policy. We need to lock arms more now than we ever have. And so I'll just make that shameless pitch for the coalition. And then lastly, sign up for the newsletter. I know that's a really bland thing to end on here, but sign up for the newsletter and stay engaged. With that, we have 1 minute left. Does anyone have any parting thoughts or anything? Does anyone have a Super Bowl pick? I know we got some New Englanders here. I'm going for the Seahawks, so I'm just letting you all know. I mean, deal with it. I can't see them win another Super Bowl. I mean, it ain't right. And then they got to get it back for Marshawn Lynch. They should have handed him the ball off the last time they faced off in the Super Bowl. So anyone, any other thoughts there? Are we good?
Tension in the coalition.
All right.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.